Have you ever believed something your whole life, followed it, completely built your identity around it, and then one day, somebody told you that the people who taught you that thing quietly stopped teaching it years ago and never told you? That feeling, that specific feeling of the ground shifting under your feet without anyone warning you. That is what we are talking about tonight. I'm not here to attack anything. I'm not here to defend anything either. I just think there is something really important about knowing when the rules of the game changed while you were still playing by the old ones. So tonight on Boring Podcast, we are sitting with 5 things the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, no longer teaches the way it once did, and I want you to stay with me through all 5 because the last one is the one that makes people go quiet. Grab your drink. Get comfortable. Let's go. Number 1. The Adam God Theory. Okay, so this one goes deep, and I want to explain it simply because it deserves that. In the 1850s, Brigham Young, the second president of the LDS Church, and honestly, one of the most influential figures in American religious history, stood up in front of his congregation and taught something that would make most modern Latter-day Saints completely uncomfortable today. He taught that Adam, the biblical Adam from the Garden of Eden, was actually God the Father. That Adam came to this earth with one of his celestial wives, Eve, and that he was the literal father of Jesus Christ. He did not say this once. He said it multiple times. It was recorded. It was printed in the Journal of Discourses, which was an official church publication. And then slowly, quietly, it disappeared. By the late 1800s, church leaders were already distancing themselves from it. By the 20th century, it was being called a misunderstanding, a misquote, something taken out of context. But here is what I keep thinking about. If a leader teaches something from the pulpit, repeatedly, with conviction, and it ends up in official church records, at what point does that become doctrine? And at what point does quietly walking it back become something the congregation deserved to be told about directly? I am not saying there is a clean answer. I am genuinely asking, because I think most of us have had a version of this in our own lives. Maybe not theology. Maybe it was a rule in your family that everyone followed, until one day nobody followed it, and nobody explained why. Maybe it was a belief about yourself that someone gave you when you were young, and you carried it for years before realizing the person who gave it to you had already moved on. What belief are you still carrying that the person who gave it to you let go of a long time ago? Sit with that for a second. Number 2, Blood Atonement. This one is darker, and I want to be careful with it, but I also think it is important. Brigham Young and a few other early church leaders taught a doctrine that was called Blood Atonement. The idea was that some sins were so serious that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ alone could not cover them. That for certain extreme sins, a person's own blood would need to be shed to achieve full forgiveness. Now, the modern LDS Church is very clear. This is not and has never been a doctrine of the Church. They say Brigham Young was speaking rhetorically, symbolically, that it was never meant to be taken literally and was never practiced. But researchers and historians have spent decades going back and forth on this. There are accounts in early Utah history that make people uncomfortable. There are sermons that read less like metaphor and more like instruction. And again, quietly, it stopped being taught. What I find interesting is not the doctrine itself. What I find interesting is the pattern. Because here is something I think about in my own life. How many things do we hold on to, not because they are true or helpful, but because they were said with enough authority and enough confidence that we never thought to question them? Someone in your life, maybe a parent, maybe a teacher, maybe an older version of yourself, told you something about who you are. And you believed it, not because you tested it, because they said it like it was fact, and now you are still living inside that story. What is one thing someone told you about yourself that you have never actually verified? Number 3. The Whites and Delightsome Prophecy. This one is uncomfortable, and I am not going to soften it because I think honesty matters more than comfort when we are talking late at night like this. In the original Book of Mormon, published in 1830, there was a verse in 2nd Nephi that described a future transformation for the Lamanites, a people group in the book. The verse said that if they accepted the gospel, they would become, quote, white and delightsome. The implication, particularly in the racial context of 1830s America, was that dark skin was a spiritual condition, that righteousness would literally lighten the skin of people who converted. This verse existed in the Book of Mormon for 150 years. In 1981 it was changed. The word white was replaced with the word pure. The church said it was a restoration of the original manuscript wording. Scholars have debated that explanation. Some agree, some do not. But here is what stays with me. For 150 years, members read that verse. Some of them used it to justify ideas about race that caused real harm to real people. And when the change came, it came quietly. No major announcement. No congregational conversation about what had been taught before and why it was being changed now. And I think there is something really worth sitting with in that. Not just in religion. In life. How many of the systems we grew up inside had something quietly built into them that we did not have the language to question yet? And when did we get permission to start questioning it? Number 4. Polygamy as a celestial requirement. Most people know the LDS Church practiced polygamy. That is not the part most people know. The part most people do not know is that early church leaders did not just teach polygamy as permitted. Some of them taught it as required, as essential to the highest degree of celestial glory, that a man could not reach the highest heaven without living the principle of plural marriage. Joseph Smith received what is recorded as Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, a revelation about plural and eternal marriage. Early leaders like Heber C. Kimball taught that men who rejected polygamy when they had the opportunity were rejecting a commandment of God. Then in 1890 the manifesto was issued, polygamy officially ended, the church moved forward, but here is the quiet tension that does not get talked about enough. If something was once taught as essential for salvation and then it stopped being taught, what does that mean for the people who lived their entire lives around that requirement? What does it mean for the women who entered those marriages believing it was the path to their highest spiritual destiny? And here is the question I want you to take into your own week. Is there something in your life right now that you are treating as essential, as non-negotiable, as the only path forward that maybe deserves a second look? Not because it is wrong, just because you have not looked at it honestly in a while. Number 5. And this is the quiet one. The shifting teaching on who can hold the priesthood. Until 1978, men of black African descent were not permitted to hold the LDS priesthood. They could be members. They could attend services. But the highest ordinances, the leadership roles, the temple ceremonies that the church teaches are connected to eternal progression, those were not available to them. This was not just a policy, it was taught as doctrine by multiple church presidents. It was connected to theological explanations about the pre-existence, about the war in heaven, about spiritual valiance before birth. Then in June of 1978, Church President Spencer W. Kimball announced a revelation. The priesthood would be extended to all worthy male members, regardless of race. Members wept. Many called it one of the most spiritual moments of their lives. But the theological explanations that had been used to justify the restriction for over 130 years, the doctrines that had been taught from pulpits and printed in manuals, they did not get a formal retraction. In 2013, the church published an essay acknowledging that the earlier teachings were the theories of men and not doctrine, that the previous explanations were wrong. And I want to sit in that with you for a moment because I think it matters beyond religion. How do institutions, families, relationships, workplaces, how do they reckon with being wrong about something they taught with absolute certainty for a very long time? And more personally, how do you reckon with it? How do you, when you realize something you believed fully, something you maybe even used to judge others or limit yourself, was not as solid as you thought? Do you grieve it quietly? Do you get angry? Do you just move forward without processing it? I think most of us move forward without processing it, and I think that is why so many of us feel this low-level weight we cannot quite name. It is the unprocessed reckonings, the beliefs we quietly retired without ever holding a proper goodbye. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. You do not have to be religious for any of this to matter to you, because every single one of these 5 things is really just a human story. A story about authority and trust. About what happens when the things we were given as absolute truth turn out to be more complicated than we were told. About how institutions and people, and even our own minds, can hold something as unquestionable for years and then let it go without ever fully explaining why. And the small practical thing I want you to try this week is simple. Pick one belief you have about yourself or your life that you have never actually questioned out loud. Write it down. Just the belief. One sentence. And underneath it, write where it came from and whether that source is still one you trust. That is it. You do not have to solve it. You do not have to change anything. Just look at it honestly for the first time. Because I think most of the weight we carry is not from the hard things that happen to us. It is from the explanations we were given for those hard things that we never went back to check. Anyway, that is 5 things. That is tonight. If this hit something for you, share it with one person who you think would sit with it quietly and appreciate it. And if you have been listening to boring podcast for a while and you have not left a review yet, tonight is a good night for that. I will be back next week with something else worth sitting with. Take care of yourself.